The title of my speech is Drops in the Bucket, A Space Odyssey. If you're anything like me, you're borderline obsessed with Star Wars. My love for these films began when I was just 6 and first watched the original trilogy with my family, and since then Star Wars has played a pretty integral part in my life. Young Harrison Ford was my very first celebrity crush. Revenge of the Sith was the first PG-13 movie I ever saw when I was only 10. And you can imagine my joy when 2 years ago it was announced that Disney would be making a new Star Wars sequel. I mean, it's practically all I talked about for about 2 years. But what I always loved most about the Star Wars universe was the theme of underdog heroes overcoming incredible odds to ultimately save the galaxy. After all, there was no logical reason a Corellian smuggler, a farm boy from Tatooine, and a princess who'd grown up her whole life in a palace should have been able to take down the massive galactic empire. But they did. As a child, I felt this was the kind of life to aspire to. However, as I grew older, it quickly became clear to me that the world was not filled with unlikely heroes like everyone's favorite intergalactic trio at all. In fact, heroes in the real world were very few and far between. I wondered why this was. After all, it didn't seem to be that people didn't care about changing the world around them. So why didn't more people try? I, of course, brought this query to my best friend and closest confidant, my mom, and her response has shaped the way I've looked at the world ever since. She told me, "You're right. It's not that people don't care about making the world better. The problem is that people see themselves as just tiny drops in a huge bucket. They think there's no way they can ever make a difference, so why bother trying?" And it's as if everyone today has a bad case of drop-in-the-bucket syndrome. Now, drop-in-the-bucket syndrome may not be a technical term, but it seems to be a pretty good way to describe this somewhat abstract phenomenon that is unfortunately taking over our lives. But I fear it's also true that unless we as a society can find a way to overcome our drop-in-the-bucket syndrome, there's no way we'll ever be able to change the world for the better. So first, let's visit the Mos Eisley Cantina, where we can hire a maybe less than reputable pilot and examine the causes behind this collective lack of confidence in ourselves. Then we'll run into some trouble and get pulled into the Death Star's tractor beam as we're forced to face the reality of the effects this drop-in-the-bucket syndrome has on our society. And lastly, we'll face off against the Empire in a head-to-head battle as we find some solutions. So as we roll into Mos Eisley, let's step for a moment into the seedy cantina, where amongst the smugglers and lowlives, we can uncover the causes to the equally unsavory problem facing us today. A recurring theme throughout the original and best Star Wars movies was that even the protagonists fighting with the rebellion often doubted their own abilities to really affect change. Unfortunately, this mindset is one that permeates the societies in our galaxy as well. In a world where there are over 7.4 billion people and counting, it's not difficult to see why it's so tempting for individuals to see themselves as infinitesimal drops in an impossibly large bucket. Moreover, it's easy to become discouraged when we are constantly bombarded with images and sound bites reminding us of the world's poverty, hunger, violence, and intolerance. As a result, we lead ourselves to believe that either there is nothing we can do, or that someone else more powerful or knowledgeable must be the one to act. This, in turn, creates a vicious cycle of inaction and reinforces collective negative viewpoints. The issue is that most of the problems that plague our society, by virtue of being so immense, require collective action to solve. Encyclopedia Britannica defines this as action taken together by a group of people whose goal is to enhance their status and achieve a common objective. Seems simple enough, but the problem comes when no one is willing to act because everyone has the mindset that their potential contribution is too insignificant to matter. After all, how can we solve problems that require collective action when we collectively believe there's nothing we can do? It's like Luke Skywalker said early on in the original Star Wars film. It's not that I like the Empire. I hate it, but there's nothing I can do about it right now. It's this very kind of thinking that when adopted en masse by society leads to a culture of drop-in-the-bucket syndrome and the unfortunate effects that come along with it. So, now that we've found our ship and hired our pilot, let's make the jump to light speed and travel to the other side of the galaxy. Here, we'll come face to face with the evil Empire and the negative effects our collective self-doubt problem has on society. One of the biggest ways that we can see drop in the bucket syndrome manifested in our society is in the political sphere. In this circumstance, it can be observed as a type of disaffected voter phenomenon. In other words, certain groups of eligible voters, despite their dissatisfaction with the current tide of politics, become so disillusioned with the system and so unconvinced of their role in it that they've collectively refrained from voting. In America, this is particularly a problem with young voters. The Center for Information and Research on Civic Learning and Engagement revealed that in the 2014 midterm election, only 26% of eligible millennials voted, mostly because the majority of young people believed their vote wouldn't matter. However, the Center for American Progress estimates that by the 2020 election, millennials will make up 36% of the eligible voting body. 36% represents a huge potential for change, but none of these young people will continue to let their drop in the bucket syndrome stop them from voting. Another way that we can see the effects of this negative mindset in our daily lives is in the frequent lack of action taken to solve serious problems in our communities. Take, for example, poverty, a problem that is unfortunately unavoidable no matter who you are or where you live. A problem which, according to the U.S. Census Bureau, affects 45 million Americans. Now, the nonprofit charity Jewish Federation of Seattle identified 12 ways that people can help to solve poverty and homelessness in their communities. The good news is that all of these strategies, from fundraising to volunteering to petitioning legislators, start at the local organization, grassroots level. However, they also all require people to actually join together and act. In a 2014 article entitled 8 Reasons People Don't Get Involved, John Paul Flintoff, author of the book How to Change the World, points out that the biggest barriers to people taking action in their communities are usually in their own heads. He specifically highlights that one of the largest contributing factors to this problem is that too many people believe they have nothing to offer. Therefore, it's not hard to see how our unfortunate drop in the bucket syndrome is the main reason that the evils in the world around us only seem to get worse. Now, all this may seem a little disheartening, but don't worry. Now it's time for an epic climactic battle with the dark side so we can discover some ways to defeat our drop in the bucket problem. Fixing a collective negative mindset might seem like a daunting task, but what we have to realize is that this problem only exists due to so many separate people believing that the drop they have to offer is too small to matter. Logically then, the opposite is true as well. So how do we start? According to business and leadership expert Steve Coase, to change the way one views their ability to contribute, one must condition themselves to focus on A, believing in the goodness of their goals, B, believing in themselves, and C, believing in their leaders and peers. Secondly, one of the most effective ways we can begin to overcome our doubts is to just get out there and do something, regardless of whether or not we may truly believe at first that our contribution will make an impact. This is not to say that one person can single-handedly change the world if they decide to try. But there is no doubt that when people lead by example, others see this and experience a perceptual shift, and change comes. Consider Mahatma Gandhi's 1930 Salt March, in which Gandhi marched to the sea to protest British taxes, and as he went was joined by thousands of Indians who saw his bravery and decided to follow. Ultimately, amazing chain reactions like these led to India getting its independence just a few years later. However, none of this would have been possible if those thousands of people, Gandhi included, hadn't have set aside their innate drop-in-the-bucket mindset and forced themselves to have faith that together their drops would mean something. Having blind faith in your ability to make a difference may seem scary, but when several people overcome that fear and give change a try, amazing things can happen. Today, we've been on quite the intergalactic adventure to discover the causes, effects, and solutions to society's drop-in-the-bucket syndrome. So as this space odyssey comes to a close, let's take some lessons from my favorite movies on how each of us can do our part to overcome this problem. Even though it can be hard at times, we must learn to embrace our inner Luke, Leia, Han, or really any member of the rebellion. We must keep in mind that as remarkable as their story may be, it could have never begun if the brave rebellion fighters had succumbed to the temptation to believe, I can't make a difference, so there's no point in trying. We must apply this concept to our galaxy as well. Fear, doubt, and apprehension are normal human emotions, but we cannot allow them to control our lives and prevent us from shaping the future. Lastly, remember that even though the Star Wars films focus mainly on the adventures of 3 protagonists, even these inspiring heroes had the full support of the rebellion and its allies behind them. Take some solace in knowing that even though our individual contributions are vital, we don't have to change the world all by ourselves. We'll do it together. So, take a deep breath and get out there and do something. Get out there and start. The change in the way you see your abilities and the way others see theirs will come. And the next time you're worrying that you're too small, too insignificant to really make a difference, just remember that the Rebel Alliance could have never won the Battle of Endor and defeated the Galactic Empire if it weren't for the help of some little Ewoks.